I think to me it was like,
Mike's on.
if it changes for any reason,
Good evening.
it's a new magnet.
Welcome to the Oregon City Council regular meeting for December the 12th, 2022. The time now is 7:04, and we begin the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
No worries. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing something.
Ms. Evans, you take a roll call of council members present.
Mr. Davish?
Here.
Mr. Drake?
Here.
Mr. Horniak?
Here.
Mrs. Powell? Here. Mr. Reeves?
Here.
Mr. Wallensack?
Here.
Mr. Zale?
Here. Also present at tonight's meeting is Mayor Michael Safarian, City Administrator Joel Major, Clerk of Council Tina Evans, Law Director Melissa Pora, Public Service Director Paul Roman, Chief of Police Brandon Began, Assistant Chief of Police Ryan Spangler, Assistant Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien, Assistant Fire Chief Mark Mullins, Assistant Finance Director Nick Roman. Council, the first order of business for this evening is the approval of the meeting minutes from November the 14th, 2022. Can I get a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
even though I wasn't here, I did read them and I watched the thing. So yes, I approve the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Council, are there any objection? The meeting minutes from November 14th council meeting will be approved. Also, council, we need to add some items to this week's agenda that we did not talk about last week. We need to add items 185 to 189, 2022.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Davish. Thank you, Mr. Davish. Counselor, are there any objections? Hearing none, items 185 through 189, 2022 will be added to this week's meeting agenda. The following item, council, item 181 was discussed in last week's meeting. Council, do you have any questions or comments regarding item 180, 2022? Hearing none, I will assign item 180, 2022 as ordinance 180, 2022. And ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record, please.
An ordinance authorizing and approving a community reinvestment area agreement with Oregon Place Apartments LLC, providing for a project in real property tax abatement pursuant to the State Community Reinvesting Area Program and declaring an emergency.
Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 180 of 2022 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Wallensack. Thank you, Mr. Wallensack. Ms. Evans, would you read,
Roll call.
oh, I'm sorry. Would you take a roll call vote for ordinance 180, 2022?
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mrs. Powell?
yes,
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 180, 2022 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. The next item we also discussed last week was item 181, 2022. Council, do you have any questions or comments regarding item 181, 2022? Hearing none, I will ask Ms. Evans to read item 181. I will assign item 181, 2022 as ordinance 181, 2022, and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record.
An ordinance declaring improvements to certain parcels of real property to be public purpose and exempt from taxation, describing the public improvements to be made to directly benefit such parcels, requiring the owners of the improvements on such parcels to make service payments in lieu of taxes, and establishing a municipal public improvement tax increment equivalent fund for the deposit of such service payments pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Sections 5709.40, 5709.42, and 5709.43, and declaring an emergency.
Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 181 of 2022 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Davish. Thank you, Mr. Davish. Ms. Evans, would you take a roll call vote of council, please, on item 181?
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mrs. Pollock?
yes,
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenseck?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes. Thank you, council. Ordinance 181, 2022 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. The next item, which was also discussed last week, is item 182, 2022. Council, do you have any questions or comments regarding item 182, 2022?
Mr. President.
Mr. Horniak.
No question, just one comment. I did want to thank Mr. Roman for following up on the information. There have been some requests and discussion of solar-powered streetlights. And Mr. Roman, thank you very much for the follow-up and the information. Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. I ditto that, Mr. Roman. The information is very helpful. Thank you for that. Hearing no other questions or comments, I will assign item 182, 2022 as ordinance 182, 2022, and ask Ms. Evans to read it in the record.
Authorizing the Toledo Edison Company to install 9 50-watt LED Acorn post-top style luminaries on 20-foot fiberglass poles with underground supply located in Oregon Town Center Plat 1, providing for the assessment to be benefited property owners, and authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue a purchase order to the Toledo Edison Company, 76 South Main Street, Akron, Ohio, in an amount not to exceed $20,048.73, and declaring an emergency.
Council.
Mr. President.
Ms. Pollock.
I move for passage of ordinance 182 of 2022 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Pollock.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Ms. Evans, you take a roll call vote of council.
Mrs. Pollock?
Yes,
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenseck?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 182, 2022 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. The next item, 183, 2022, is also discussed last week. Council, do you have any other questions or comments regarding item 183, 2022? Hearing none, I will assign item 183, 2022 as ordinance 183, 2022, and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, fire chief, and finance director to sign change order number 1 with Midwest Contracting Incorporated, 1428 Elwin Road, Holland, Ohio, in an amount of a net contract addition of $46,640 for additional work related to the Oregon Central Fire Station 2021 project, and declaring an emergency.
Council.
Mr. President.
Ms. Pollock.
I move for passage of ordinance 183 of 2022 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Pollock.
Second.
Mr. Davish, thank you. Second by Mr. Davish. Ms. Evans, would you take a roll call vote on item 183?
Mrs. Pollock?
Yes,
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenseck?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 183, 2022 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. Next item up for consideration was also discussed last week, item 184, 2022. Council, do you have any other questions or comments regarding item 184? Hearing none, I will assign item 184, 2022 as ordinance 184, 2022, and ask Ms. Evans to read into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders to Environmental Systems Research Institute Incorporated, 380 New York Street, Redlands, California, for the purchase of ArcGIS annual fee, small government term enterprise 3-year license agreement to be used by the Department of Public Service in a total amount not to exceed $79,999, and declaring an emergency.
Council.
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallensack.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Mr.
Mr.
President.
Wallensack.
I move for passage of ordinance number 184 of 2022 as emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Wallensack.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Ms. Evans, you take a roll call vote of council on ordinance 184.
Mr. Wallensack?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mrs. Pollock?
yes,
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 184, 2022 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. The next item for consideration this evening is presented by Mayor Michael Sperrian and Acting Finance Director Nick Roman. This is item 185, 2022.
Let's go right to Nick.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is to authorize supplemental appropriations. If you take a look at Exhibit A, majority of these are to decrease budgeted amounts due to us not doing projects this year. A lot of these are getting moved to 2023. These increases are mainly due to seasonal personnel. We increased a lot of the wages, which really increased the amount that over what we had budgeted. There's also a decent amount of increases in wages this year that we did not expect. Also, there's a $450,000 increase for medical insurance fund. This is just to make sure we can cover any claims that come in through the rest of the year. I don't expect us to need this amount, but we need to have it just in case. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions or comments regarding item 185, 2022? Hearing none, I will assign item 185, 2022 as ordinance 185, 2022 and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record.
Authorizing and directing the finance director to make supplemental appropriations in interfund and intrafund transfers on an as-needed basis for fiscal year 2022 and declaring an emergency.
Council,
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for passage of ordinance number 185 of 2022 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Ms. Evans, you take a roll call vote of council.
Mr. Wallenczak?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mrs. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 185, 2022 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. Next item, which is also presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Acting Finance Director Nick Roman, is item 186, 2022. And I also defer to Mr.
I'd like to say something first. And then,
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Go ahead.
all right. Just when you say, as presented by myself and acting finance director, when we have to have an acting finance director, we appointed Nick at this time. And so the state recognizes him as our finance director, not just acting. And it would be my objective as Nick goes through this process and that anybody who would go in to come up in the middle of our budgetary thing is the real chore. And Nick's done very well. It'd be my objective to, in the future here, appoint Nick to being the finance director. And Nick's just, was welcoming to that, as well as taking the acting finance director's job for the current time to make sure it's something he actually did want to pursue and do. And so if that does come through fruition in the near future, I will be asking your concurrence to appoint him to the permanent job. But from this point forward, we'll just call him finance director instead of acting, because he's acted pretty well as I'm just reading. All right. So we're gonna take that acting off, Tina.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Roman, do you have anything to add?
Maybe not.
Well, I really appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. Well, for this ordinance, this is to authorize us to make what are called advanced loan payments from one fund to another. This is used because we have some negative fund balances on project accounts where we're going to be getting reimbursement from for grants and or loan funds through OWDA, OPWC. But we're still waiting on that reimbursement. We're hoping to get it in the 2022 year, but we're not 100% sure that we will. So after talking with Schoenhart and Associates, who does our financial statements, they suggested this is the most responsible way to take care of the negative fund balances if they do occur at the end of the year. So this just authorizes us to make those loan payments from other funds into these project funds for the end of the year. And then next year, once we get the reimbursement back in, we will pay that loan back to the original fund.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions or comments for Mr. Roman?
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. any type of time frame on when we would expect those funds to be back, or is it just a guess if you say something?
Well, actually, when I got back here for this meeting, I was notified that hopefully we will get the one, it's for the 254, so the $2.2 million. Hopefully we'll get that one in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
But we have submitted for reimbursement. We just haven't gotten it back yet. So it's just dependent on when they approve it and send the money. Usually it's within a couple of weeks, if not a month.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walczak. Thank you, Mr.
Romy, you have anything else that you want to add?
Well, Mr. President, I was going to say, a lot of these are our projects, and EDA is a federal grant. And we just finished the Parkway Road project and this year. And then the other one's Navarre-Coy, which we're just getting to the very end. So it's hard to get these funds by the end of December. We're hoping January. So,
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I will assign item 186, 2022 as ordinance 186, 2022 and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record.
Authorizing and directing the finance director to make advanced loan payments between funds on an as-needed basis for fiscal year 2022 and declaring an emergency.
Council,
Mr. President.
Mr. Walczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for passage of ordinance number 186 of 2002 or 2022 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Walczak. Second, Mr. Davish. Thank you, Mr. Davish. Ms. Evans, would you take a roll call vote of council?
Mr. Wallenseck?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mrs. Powell?
yes,
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes. Thank you, council. Ordinance 186, 2022 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. The next item for consideration is item 187, 2022, which is presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Police Chief Brandon Began, and I will defer to Chief Began.
Thank you, Mr. President. Earlier this year, we saw that there was a grant opportunity through the state of Ohio from federal American Rescue Plans or ARPA funds. The purpose of the grant was to mitigate negative circumstances that were caused by COVID and their effects on the workforce. Back before COVID and at the very beginning of COVID, we had 48 officers. We're down to 43 right now. We've been going through the process. Earlier this year, we put in for the funding, and on last Monday, we got approved for $442,000. Those funds can be used for officer wages and all the fringe benefits, which is over $80,000 per officer for 5 officers for a 1-year time frame. And it came at about perfect timing because last Tuesday we did interviews with multiple candidates. We're bringing 3 names forward tonight. We're very excited about these new officers. And once this grant funding comes through, it will be used to pay for new officers' wages for that first year. So it was perfect timing that it came through. We're very excited. It's a large amount. It'll be very helpful in getting us back up to the number that we are used to.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for you explained this very well in the budget hearing, and congratulations on an award like this. Is great. I mean, really a great amount to get. Good work.
Thank you.
Council, any other questions or comments?
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
thank you. I just wanted to ditto those remarks. Thank you guys very much for going out and seeking this and applying for it and being awarded for it. That really helps us out in the city. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Council, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I will assign item 187, 2022 as ordinance 187, 2022, and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor and chief of police to execute all documents necessary to accept the American Rescue Plan Funding 2022 grant program submitted by the Oregon Police Division and declaring an emergency.
Council,
Mr. President.
Ms. Paula.
I move for passage of ordinance 187 of 2022 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Paula. Second, Mr. Davish. Thank you, Mr. Davish. Ms. Evans, would you take a roll call vote of council, please?
Mrs. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzeck?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 187, 2022 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. The next two items, 188 and 189, are presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Public Service Director Paul Roman. And I will defer to Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance 188 is for the purchase of 5 chemicals that were needed for water treatment in 2022, really due to the limited supply of raw materials and inflation. We have these 5 chemicals that were over the $25,000 purchase limit, which is in the city's policy 59. I have that attached in the exhibit. And there also is the Ohio Revised Code 73505, which is a $50,000 limit. Ours happens to be 25. Well, these chemicals in previous years, let's say going back 3 years, were always under 25,000. And in past years, in some cases, would bid everything. And I can tell you, we had bids received this Thursday. We had bids for every chemical. And we need to do that because of these high costs. Well, so anyways, per Ohio Revised Code 735.051, public service directors do have the right to purchase chemicals without a public bid. But you do need council support to do that after the fact, just like any emergency work that we would do in the right of way and so on. So anyways, I'm just letting you know, I'm happy to answer any questions. I can tell you chlorine almost quadrupled in price in 1 year. Went from $550 a ton to $18.80 per ton. I can tell you over 3 years, all of our treatment costs, chemical costs, have doubled in 3 years. But chlorine is probably one of the worst. We do use less with ozone, but it's still a high cost. A lot of these other chemicals that are listed here literally doubled in the unit price in 1 year. So we did receive bids this last Thursday, and I'll have an ordinance next week. That'll be a locked-in price for all of these chemicals for 23, okay? But because we didn't have these chemicals with a public bid, that's why this ordinance is before you tonight. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions or comments regarding item 188, 2022 for Mr. Roman?
Mr. President.
Mr.
Thank you,
Wallenzeck?
Mr. President. Mr. Roman, can you give me an idea of how much of a reduction of chlorine use that we have with the ozone?
Well, but I can tell you, Mr. President, Mr. Wallenzeck,
Mr. Roman?
in the beginning, with ozone, which is really your true disinfectant, you still needed chlorine almost to its full amount. There are times with lake water that has a lot of solids in it, and you still have a high chlorine demand, okay? But your water quality does improve when it comes to January and February with the ice cover and so on. It is a much better product, but you still, I would say you probably reduced it by at least a third for what we were using before, okay? What's called disinfectant byproducts, the problem with chlorine is water that sits in a pipe for a long period of time because of using chlorine. You'd have high disinfectant byproducts. But when you use ozone, when you're putting oxygen into the water, you don't have that problem anymore. And it's just a better product. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenzeck. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any other questions or comments?
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake?
I got a question for Mr. Roman. Paul, do they still put is it fluoride in the water?
Yeah, well, and we are required, we do, Mr. President, Mr. Drake, we are required to put in fluoride. When we put the minimum.
That's the white stuff that clogs up.
No,
What's that?
sometimes the calcium will build up. Yes.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I will assign item 188, 2022 as ordinance 188, 2022, and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to issue purchase orders to Bonded Chemicals Incorporated, 2645 Charter Street, Columbus, Ohio. JCI Jones Chemicals, 1765 Ringling Boulevard, Sarasota, Florida. And Lundy, 10 Riverview Drive, Danbury, Connecticut, for the purchase of various chemicals used by the water treatment plant and declaring an emergency.
Council.
Mr. President,
Ms. Pauloff.
I move for passage of ordinance 188 of 2022 and declaring an emergency.
Second,
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Second by Mr. Reeves.
yes.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Ms. Evans, would you take a roll call vote of council, please?
Mrs. Pauloff?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenseck?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes. Thank you, council. Ordinance 188, 2022 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. The next item, 189, 2022, I will also defer to Public Service Director Paul Roman. Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is needed to enter into a design contract with Arcadis to provide various concrete work, replacement design for the water treatment plant. This was an item in our budget, and we did seek qualification statements from firms, engineering firms, and we received 3 statements. Arcadis was most qualified for the work. They have done a very large, we just mentioned the ozone project, but they were the designer for that, did a great job. So they were the most qualified for this. Right now, our estimated cost for this concrete work is around 1.2 million. But I'm not too sure what we're going to see in 2023. So we'll wait and see. It's possible we might do this over a 2-year period or phases to that effect. We still need to do the design to really know the full impact of this work. So, but again, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rowan. Council, any questions or comments regarding item 189? Hearing none, I will assign item 189, 2022 as ordinance 189, 2022, and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and director of public service to enter into an agreement with Arcadis US Incorporated, 1 Seagate Suite 700, Toledo, Ohio, to provide professional engineering services for the design of various concrete replacement work above and around various tanks at the water treatment plant in an amount not to exceed $149,000 and declaring an emergency.
Council,
Mr. President,
Ms. Pauloff.
I move for passage of ordinance 189 of 2022 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second,
Second by Mr. Reeves. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Ms. Evans, will you take a roll call vote on ordinance 189, 2022?
Mrs. Pollock?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
yes.
Mr. Davish?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenseck?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 189, 2022 passes with 7 yeas and 0 nays. Council, this will complete our agenda items for the evening, and we will now move to the mayor's report.
Thank you, Mr. President, and the council. I have a retirement and appointments, and I will start with the retirement. And this is of Scott Coughlin. I remember when Scott Coughlin hired in here through the rec department as rec utility supervisor, went on to the water treatment plant, to the streets department, back out to the water treatment plant. I hope you can find it in your heart to concur with his retirement request, because he left the 2nd on Wednesday, officially retiring on December 5th. So I'd ask council's concurrence in accepting the retirement resignation of Scott Coughlin as of December 5th, 2022.
Council,
Mr. President,
Ms. Pauloff.
I move to concur with the mayor's acceptance of Scott Coughlin's retirement as maintenance worker at the water treatment plant effective Monday, December 5th, 2022.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second,
Second by Mr. Reeves. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Council, are there any objections? Hearing no objections, Mayor, council does concur with accepting the retirement of Scott Coughlin.
I'm sure Scott will be happy. I would, let's see, if you wouldn't have done it, dragging it back here might have been difficult.
Be nice.
Then we have appointments for police officers, and we have 3 of them. I'll draw 1 for today, and we'll do the others in the future. I chose Samuel McClure. I'm just kidding, Megan. We're gonna do them all, just to see if you were paying attention. No, no, you don't have to come. You're good. After you're appointed, we'll go on with you then after that. But I will start council with Samuel McClure, and ask council's concurrence in the appointment of Samuel McClure to police officer. Step one, the OPPA pay range of $29.77 an hour, which is an annual rate of $61,921.60. And the startup date will be January 3rd, 2023. And I'd ask council's concurrence once again. The appointment to police officer Samuel McClure.
Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Pauloff.
I move to concur with the mayor's appointment of Samuel McClurg to police officer effective starting date January 3rd, 2023.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Second by Mr. Davish. Thank you, Mr. Davish. Council, are there any objections? Hearing no objections, Mayor, council does concur with your appointment of Samuel McClurg.
Next, it will be the appointment to police officer of Megan Henry. And Megan also will be placed in step one of the OPPA pay range of $29.77 an hour, which is also $61,921.60. And her startup date also will be January 3rd, 2023. And ask council's concurrence in that appointment of Megan Henry to police officer.
Council,
Mr. President,
Ms. Pauloff.
I move to concur with the mayor's appointment of Megan Henry to police officer effective start date January 3rd, 2023.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. Thank you, Mr. Drake. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, Mayor, council does concur with your appointment of Megan Henry to the Oregon Police Department.
Thank you, council. And say that Sam and Megan are here, and we'll call them up or ask them to speak as soon as I make this last appointment. And that is of Andrew Whitmore. Andrew Whitmore is currently employed by Washington Township. He is working today, so he is not here, but I would ask council's concurrence in the appointment to police officer of Andrew Whitmore. He also will be placed step one OPPA pay range, $29.77 an hour, $61,921.60. Startup date is also 3 January 2023. And as council's concurrence in that appointment of Andrew Whitmore to police officer.
Council,
Mr. President,
Ms. Pauloff.
I move to concur with the mayor's appointment of Andrew Whitmore to police officer effective start date January 3rd, 2023.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second.
Second, Mr. Davish. Thank you, Mr. Davish. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Mayor, council does concur with your appointment of Andrew Whitmer to the Oregon Police Division.
And Sam and Megan are here, and we usually have them come up and speak for 15, 20, 30 minutes. Or you can stand right up there by your chair and just say a few words if you would like. You don't have to say anything if you don't like to. All right. We appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
All right. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Okay, with that, I would conclude my report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Major.
Thank you, Mr. President. A couple of items, three things. Congratulations to the new officers. It's always great to get good candidates in, and yeah, congratulations on your hires.
And we'll be, I'll be swearing them in on the 3rd, which is, I believe, a month. Is that a Monday?
No,
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
It'd be
All right,
Tuesday.
yeah, that's right. It's Monday. Still, we're still in the holiday mode. So we'll see you back here then.
Nice. And just a couple of things I wanted to just accentuate the positives, talk about the good things. Chief Began, and Assistant Chief, you guys did a great job on that grant application. Mr. Nick Roman surely appreciates the grant funding to help with the general fund balance. Of course, that goes to the all-important safety services and amongst other things too. But great work on that and taking the initiative, and congratulations on the successful award of that grant. So the other thing is that I wanted to also echo what the mayor said about Nick Roman, his exemplary work that he's done on navigating the drafting of the budget. And obviously with the preliminary budget that's out there is now the fund balances are boosted a little bit thanks to the grant award and everything else. But, he and I worked through this pretty diligently, being our first time through in these positions. So it was great to go through that process, and having Schoenhart and Associates at our side to kind of coach us through some of the I wouldn't want to say turbulent issues, but some of the, when we get a little nervous about a few things, we can kind of make that phone call and navigate our way through some of the tougher parts, like the two ordinances that you had passed today. So great work, Nick. You deserve it. And that's all I have, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Major.
Mr. President, I say one thing.
You're on, sure.
And I will expand in what Mr. Mazur said about Nick. And people see the job as the finance director of just handling the finances, but it's way more than that, because they have to intermingle with the departmental heads and the employees. And we've really recognized it to be a real smooth transition as what we had. Not to say anything about other finance directors, but I've been here through probably about 5 of them, and it's been really good. So just
Thank you,
want you
Mr.
guys to
Mayor.
know that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Major. Ms. Purpura.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lucas County Canine Care and Control has asked for the assistance of the city in reminding the dog owners that the renewal of the 2023 dog licensing program is going on right now. It started December 1st and it continues through January 31st, 2023. It does allow for 1 year, 3 year, and permanent dog licenses. This can be purchased online or going to Lucas County Auditor's Office. Just as a reminder, this is the best way, should your pet get lost, to bring the pet home to the owner. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Purpura. Mr. Roman.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Reeves.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Mr. Drake.
No report. Mr. President, I just have a question for one of the fire chiefs. I forgot to ask it today in the committee meeting. Does the city still offer a week or a month where they give out free smoke detectors?
Mr. President, Mr. Drake, that's usually during the month of October, during Fire Prevention Week. It's the first week of October. However, in conjunction with the American Red Cross and the Oregon Fire Department, we're always happy to give smoke detectors away. And how that program works is we will go to the home and install those fire detectors, because it's important to us that we make sure that the home is actually safe, as we do a walkthrough through the home, make sure that there's one in every bedroom, make sure that there's one on every level. So we're more than happy to do that. All you have to do is contact the Fire Prevention Bureau at 698-7020.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Thank you, Chief. Mr. Walczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. We did have our budget hearing. We were able to review presentations from the police and fire services. We will have our final budget hearing next Monday, 12/19/22 at 6 p.m. in the conference room. So if anybody's interested in the wrap-up of the budget, I'm not sure if there's any particular departments that we're going to listen to, or if it's just going to be kind of a bring a closure to all the departments and make sure that we're in a better understanding of our municipal budget for next year. That'll be, again, next Monday, 12/19/22, 6 p.m. I do have one question. It's been about a year since we've, the TARDA levy got voted on. And since we're nearing the end of the year, I know the para services, I'm not sure if they're being implemented now where people can call and receive those services or not, or where do we stand on what TARDA is going to do with the city of Oregon?
Mr. President,
Mr. Mayor,
and Mr. Walczak, we did meet with Sam Meldon, who's the one in charge of that, and we discussed some of our plans. And I believe it was in 2023. We were we spoke about where would be the loop for the city of Oregon, and we thought it may go through Walmart, through Pearson Park and this complex. And then the other service would pick up off of that.
That's a
And-
paratrans services where people could call.
And
for-
Mr. Roman and Mr. Mazer were there also. They could expand on that more.
Thank you, Mayor.
Well, I was gonna say, Joel, you can correct me if I'm wrong. As we met with Sam Meldon, he mentioned that, I'm trying to think of the term he used. I think it was micro transit.
Microtransit.
And similar to Uber, where you would, it's a flat fee of $3 to go basically from where you are to a main loop. Okay, so there's that service, and they're still working on these services and what to provide, and they're really just starting that revenue. Yes, it started collecting, but it's not to that full budgeted amount that they were planning. But then there is the main loop, and we clearly think Navarre should be the main loop, and trying to think of where those routes will go is what we're working on. But I think at some point they do need to come to this body and kind of explain overall what the plan is. That's for sure.
Yeah, I definitely would like to hear that, and I'm sure the residents of Oregon would like to have a better understanding of what services they're gonna be paying for.
Right, I agree.
Thank you.
I will say this, when meeting with him was probably the most pleasant conversation we had with TARDA for any of the years we spoke with them. It was very well taken.
Thank you, Mr. Walzak.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Roman. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Davish.
No report.
Thank you, Mr. Davish. Ms. Pauloff.
No report from my standing committee, but Don Nelson finished our map for us for Winter Wonder Lights. I put it out there 2 hours ago, and we have over 227 shares and over 11,000 hits. So just to let you know where that stands after 2 hours. So we got over 30, no, close to 30 homes this year. So a lot of great decorations out there by everybody. So get out there and enjoy them. And that's my report. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Mr. Horniak.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. And I also do not have any report from my standing committee. Council, we do have one person signed in to speak before council, Mr. Glenn Ryan. Glenn, if you step up to the podium and state your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. My name's Glenn Ryan. I live at 2707 Pickle Road. And this is in discussion of item 182, 2022. I kind of came late to the party moving up here. But what has gotten my attention is that there has been a lack of resiliency in our infrastructure. And one of the things that we should be concentrating on right now is the ability to put solar power to a more commercial use, and also within the governmental infrastructure. There's 3 cities right now: Beaumont, California, Los Angeles, who's just who's just given a $10 million contract out, and also Highland Park, Michigan, are all putting solar power in their streetlights. Now, I'm not advocating you guys all scream, "Oh my gosh, global warming," and pull out every streetlight. What I'm advocating for is to be a little bit more proactive on this, so that when you're doing a development like 182, that you consider using solar power streetlights as opposed to just doing the same old of putting them up, hooking them into Toledo Edison, which uses natural gas to generate their electricity, and or Davis-Besse, and go a different route. And the one person I was talking to was the one that gave the $10 million contract to LA, was Franch out of Massachusetts. And they were saying that they could have put those 9 poles in for the exact same amount. The pole, solid steel, would have had 25-year life, the battery would have had a 10-year battery life, 10 to 12. And the solar unit itself would have been 25 years for the exact same amount. The upside would have been is that you would not be using any electricity off the grid. And so your property taxes for each person would be lesser because you're not now, because you're going to have to pay a fee to Toledo. I'm sure that Toledo Edison is not giving that electricity for free. So that's the only points I want to kind of make. So I urge council that in your next discussions with development, that you consider using solar power to put into, to start lighting the city of Oregon. Mr. Roman, I've got some information for you too. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Roman?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name last time, and
Thank you, thank you.
I did do some work on that, and I'm not saying it's an end all, and I took in your comments and I went through what would be available. A lot of the solar sites, they'll compare solar LED to your traditional street light that's metal halide or sodium vapor. Well, that's what we're comparing here is really Edison's LED. It has the same light. And a lot of the pricing for LED, the solar LED was around $3,500. And that includes the solar panel, battery backup, and so on. And a lot of sites had that. And as much as you do the comparison, like you take the 20,000 for these 9 lights, it's 2,200. What Edison, your property assessment is going towards that operation maintenance. I think you'd still, even if you did solar, you'd still have to collect a property tax for the future replacement. Even in 25 years, you would have to develop. So it's very comparable. I'm not saying it's the end all. My memo to council is to say, well, look, this is out there, and I agree on the resiliency. I think it's important, but I think until it's more of a standardized system, and the question is, who do you hire? Do you subcontract that work to replace, or did you do it in-house? There could be a combination of factors. Until that's more of a standard in our area, I would say, at least for this ordinance, to proceed with Edison. But I think it's important to look at in the future. So I just wanted to note, I didn't know how to present it to you. I was going to hand you my memo. I didn't know if you signed in or not. So it's what it's worth.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Mayor?
And I would like to further expand on that. We did take a route to do some green development here. And in this complex, we did a lot of research and looking at wind power, solar power, and geothermal. We went with the geothermal here in this unit. We spent over $1 million putting in a geothermal system. And because the research we said that for us, the solar and the wind turbines weren't as applicable for us as what geothermal was. And we experienced some issues with that also, but we do kind of keep an eye on that to see when it would be practical for us to intervene with one of the other sources of energy. So we do look at it. Mr. Roman's really, really good at keeping us apprised of that. And so we'll always kind of keep in the back of our mind.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, just give me a second here that I forgot to mention something in my my committee report. Our next meeting on the 19th will not be a committee of the whole meeting. It'll be a regular meeting. We also have a public hearing that same evening at 7 p.m. So thank you for that. I will seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Second by Ms. Paulo. Thank you, Ms. Paulo. Council, any objections? Meeting is adjourned.
So meetings at 6, the zoning hearing is at 7, and then following the zoning hearing, will be the regular.
We go right to the meeting. Yeah. We don't separate the time.